In the context of police brutality, people who engage in transactional sex live in a particularly precarious and threatening environment. The current federal laws in Canada, enacted under the Conservative Party of Canada in 2014, at the time led by Stephen Harper, amendments introduced by Peter MacKay, and lauded by former Conservative MP Joyce Smith, attempt to advance a specific agenda, one perhaps best summarized by Manitoba Senator Don Plett's words. Of course we don't want to make life safer for prostitutes. We want to do away with prostitution. That is the intent. The results are structural isolation, which puts people providing sexual services at greater risk of harm. Generally, when one considers the laws that are designed to protect individuals in the context of labor, one would envision laws that are just, laws that advance worker protections and that discourage and decrease the exploitation that occurs in a capitalist economy that prioritizes cis white male supremacy and heteropatriarchy. Not so with sex work, however. If the intent of the laws surrounding one's financial livelihood is to eliminate the entire occupation, the negative stigma that surrounds the work is extremely likely to be weaponized against anyone engaging in the activity. The laws that were enacted ensured that anything and anyone surrounding someone trading any type of sexual services for compensation are criminalized, effectively criminalizing the industry entirely. The laws criminalize the purchase of sexual services, profiting from the avails of someone engaging in sexual services, which, in effect, criminalizes the very people that sex workers sometimes hire for their own safety, for example, drivers, security, or administrative staff. They target sex workers who advertise their services, as well as communications between sex workers, such as lists that warn of violence that sex workers have experienced. Robin Maynard has written extensively about this, and from the article, Fighting Wrongs with Wrongs, How Canadian Anti-Trafficking Crusades Have Failed Sex Workers, Migrants, and Indigenous Communities in 2016, she writes, sex workers interviewed in Vancouver's downtown east side, where the Vancouver police have been implementing the Nordic model and directing their energies towards arresting clients, but not sex workers, since at least 2013. Their research found that sex workers did not want their clients arrested unless they were violent or exploitative. It also found that targeting clients put sex workers in danger due to the resulting displacement and isolation, lack of police protection, and a lack of time to screen and negotiate services. Similar findings were documented in a study conducted by SWWAC, a Vancouver sex worker organization, and Pivot Legal Society. This is particularly true for street-based sex workers who are exposed to danger when they or their clients are criminalized. The need to hide from police in order to prevent criminal charges reduces their time to screen clients, negotiate services, and assess risk. Street-based sex workers are often displaced to dark and isolated areas, increasing their vulnerability to violence. In the Supreme Court Bedford versus Canada decision, sex workers argued that their work is not dangerous in and of itself, but that the laws criminalizing the sex industry deprive workers of the ability to negotiate their conditions and thus puts them in danger. They are forced to choose between breaking the law and working in safety. In the Manitoba context, the focus is similarly on ending demand for sexual services. Sex workers live with the negative stigma of being characterized as both a victim with no agency to choose how to best meet one's own needs in the context of financial security, thereby denying an individual's human right to self-determination, regardless of whether selling sexual services is in fact legal, as well as a perpetrator of social erosion, preying on communities. From the provincial government of Manitoba's Justice website on the topic of transitional sex, it is written, "It can ruin lives. It exploits the vulnerable, especially the young. It destroys neighborhoods by making families feel unsafe, businesses falter, and by sending property values downwards. It is destructive, not only to the area where it is focused, but also to an entire city or community. It contributes to overall crime levels, supports organized crime, and lures children and young adults into the ugly and dangerous world of sexual exploitation. It is the sex trade, or prostitution, and it can bring harm to your family, your neighborhood, your community. The Manitoba government has produced this publication to inform, advise, and help communities deal with the devastating effects of the sex trade. The police, tasked with enforcing these oppositional laws, are often the ones inflicting much of the violence that sex workers experience. The constant surveillance of sex workers doing perfectly legal activities such as selling sexual services is, in and of itself, an act of violence. And I'm quoting here from a Uniter article. The example of Northern Spotlight, where, according to the RCMP website, police prearranged to meet with individuals suspected of working in the sex trade against their will or who are believed to be at higher risk of being trafficked. These meetups are referring to sting operations. To do this, the police use a technique called online carding, Claudine Chevrier, a SWWAC member, says, which means that they go and gather information on an individual based on their ads online. She adds that police are not supposed to be gathering information on private citizens doing things that are not illegal. According to Daryl Ram-Kisoon, who is the former head of the counter-exploitation unit of Winnipeg Police Services, when we counter-exploitation team comes into contact with someone working in the sex industry, on the street or even online, we generate an incident number for that individual, so we know when we last had contact with them. So sometimes we don't see these girls for a couple of weeks, so we can track when we last saw them, and we can start making inquiries on where they are. Alex, a sex worker, has concerns about this. That is absolutely an invasion of privacy, they say. It is none of their business. It is irrelevant. Sex workers are not breaking the law. More overtly, the fallout from the exercises they refer to as knock-and-talks. Sex workers report being confused and frightened and may suffer trauma and even exhibit symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Sex workers lose income and experience economic hardship. This places sex workers in a precarious position where they must either accept dates or provide services they normally wouldn't to recoup losses. Operation Northern Spotlight can also have consequences for public health, as sex workers report reluctance to keep large quantities of condoms on commercial premises for fear of raids. Operation Northern Spotlight also has a ripple effect beyond those directly impacted by driving sex workers further underground to evade police detection and making sex workers less likely to turn to law enforcement if violence occurs. From a Straight article from Vancouver. The Global Alliance Against Trafficking Women in 2011 wrote and found that not only are such policies ineffective in fighting trafficking, but they also put sex workers at increased risk of abuse. End demand for prostitution approaches not only threaten the effectiveness of anti-trafficking efforts, they can often place sex workers at greater risk of violence and exploitation.